Hey there, everybody, and welcome back to Law and Crime Now. I'm Jesse Weber, and thanks for joining us. So much to break down with the arrest of Jeffrey Epstein's associate, Ghislaine Maxwell. As you know, she has been charged with multiple felonies regarding the recruitment and transportation of minors to engage in sexual activity. She also was hit with 2 counts of perjury for allegedly lying in depositions. Now, it's interesting because today we learned that she had been moved from New Hampshire, where she was apprehended, to New York, a New York detention facility in Brooklyn, to be more specific. The SDNY will be prosecuting this case. They hope to have her arraigned this upcoming Friday. There's a lot to talk about in terms of plea deals and where this is going to go, but let's just take a step back and let's go to the press conference after her arrest. And you're going to hear right now the acting U.S. attorney from the Southern District of New York, Audrey Strauss, explain this a little bit more.
Maxwell was among Epstein's closest associates and helped him exploit girls who were as young as 14 years old. Maxwell played a critical role in helping Epstein to identify, befriend, and groom minor victims for abuse. In some cases, Maxwell participated in the abuse herself. As alleged, Maxwell and Epstein had a method. Typically, they would befriend these young girls by asking them questions about their lives, pretending to be taking an interest in them. They would take them to the movies and treat them to shopping trips. Maxwell would encourage these young girls to accept offers from Epstein to pay for their travel and their education, making these young victims feel indebted to Jeffrey Epstein. After developing a rapport with the victims, Maxwell then tried to normalize sexual abuse with a minor victim through a process known as grooming. For example, Maxwell would discuss sexual topics with the victim and undress in front of the victim, or be present for sex acts involving the minor victims and Epstein. Maxwell's presence as an adult woman helped put the victims at ease. As Maxwell and Epstein intended, this grooming process left the minor victims susceptible to sexual abuse.
Joining me now is Law and Crime's Terri Austin, criminal defense attorney Imran Ansari, and the state attorney from Palm Beach County, Dave Aronberg. It's great to have everybody here. Dave, I want to start with you. Welcome to Law and Crime Now. Many of the allegations regarding Maxwell occur in your jurisdiction, Palm Beach County. And I have to ask you, were you just as surprised as the rest of us when this announcement was made that Maxwell was arrested? Or was you or your department in any way involved? Do you plan in the future to assist in any way? Help us give some answers here.
Thank you for having me on. We were not involved in it. This was conducted by the Southern District of New York federal prosecutors, and we're a state agency here in South Florida. I was not surprised that she was charged. In fact, when the Attorney General came out and they announced the charges against Jeffrey Epstein last year, they said that other people should be prepared to be charged. The investigation was going to continue. The death of Jeffrey Epstein in the holding cell did not affect the investigation, which will encompass, I think, even more people. To me, it's interesting that the Public Corruption Unit in New York is the one who's investigating, who's handling this case. That's unusual. That means perhaps there are other people in their sights. To me, the biggest surprise was that it took so long to get her. I think it's because she purposely hid from law enforcement. She bought this 156-acre ranch in New Hampshire, a state she had no ties to. She hid out there. She bought it with an anonymous LLC using cash. And then she tried to throw other people off her trail by putting out a staged photo of her at the In-N-Out Burger in Los Angeles, totally on the other coast of the United States, where like she's ever been to an In-N-Out Burger before. So with all these things, I think is the reason why there was a delay, not to mention coronavirus put the grand jury process back some. So I think all that is why this took so long.
Well, it's interesting. You mentioned that the Public Corruption Unit is handling this, because usually it would be, my understanding, the Violent and Organized Crime Unit. And Imran, you know, the reason this might be is because, and this is the question that everybody's asking, is she going to name names? Is she going to turn? And I guess my question to you is, what could a plea deal realistically look like here? Is it the idea the bigger the name, the less time she gets off? I mean, because you also have to think about this. Is it also possible that she might, agree to turn on one person, but not the others? And would prosecutors even accept that? So really, what would a plea deal look like for Ghislaine Maxwell?
Well, a typical plea arrangement, a plea deal on a federal matter like this would be composed of some sort of cooperation, a cooperation by the defendant with the prosecutors in terms of perhaps naming names, perhaps giving more information about this criminal enterprise, this alleged criminal enterprise that may have existed. And if Ghislaine Maxwell is going to cooperate with federal prosecutors in this case, most likely that would entail her giving up some information. Now, this is a very sensational case. It's a very public case, and I think everyone is sort of waiting to find out, will she name names and who will be implicated in this, if anyone at all. So, we're going to be watching this. I think the public is going to be watching very intently to see some of these names that have been mentioned in regards to Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking ring. Will Ghislaine Maxwell flip? Will she name names? Often, if she is going to get a plea deal with these federal prosecutors, with the SDNY, she's going to have to do just that.
So one of those big names, those high-profile individuals, is Prince Andrew. Now, again, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York was asked this question. Here's what she had to say.
I'm not going to comment on anyone's status in this investigation, but I will say that we would welcome Prince Andrew coming in to talk with us. We would like to have the benefit of his statement. I have no further comment beyond what I just said, which is that our doors remain open, as we've previously said, and we would welcome him coming in and giving us an opportunity to hear his statement.
Now, Terri, I want to ask you a two-part question here. If you were advising or representing Prince Andrew at this point, what would you say to him at this point upon the arrest of Ghislaine Maxwell? And my second question is, we keep talking about maybe she's going to provide information. She has been charged with 2 counts of perjury. Why should anyone believe what she has to say now if she was willing to allegedly lie under oath?
Well, Jesse, those are 2 very good questions. As far as Prince Andrew is concerned, the very first thing I would advise him is not to publicly make statements, because clearly we have seen in the past that he has made some egregious mistakes. So he should sit tight, be quiet, and he should cooperate. As to Maxwell, as far as I'm concerned, credibility is the key issue. And once you are caught lying, if that case is tried and she goes and she sits and she's testifying, and, maybe even if she's not testifying, the jury already knows that she's lied. So her credibility is shot. And I think that that is a big issue in this case, and probably why she would want to take a plea deal.
Well, again, you talk about people and who she might name. Alan Dershowitz, acclaimed attorney, he has been caught up in the orbit of this, whether or not he engaged in any sexual misconduct. So Dershowitz tweeted this. I'd like to throw it up there if we can. And this is what he said. I hope Epstein made videos. There have been suggestions that Epstein made secret videos of all the men who have had sex in his house, as in his houses and planes. I hope he did, and they are all revealed, because they will prove I am not among them. I hereby waive any right of privacy in Epstein videos. Dave, what's your response to that? Because that's quite a statement here, and he has always been on the defensive when it has come to the Epstein matter.
Jesse, he's been on the defensive and the offensive. He has countersued. He has called the victims liars, and he has been in court to try to clear his name. I've got to say that tweet is an attempt to try to get ahead of it, saying, hey, I waive my privacy rights, when really, if the cops have it, if law enforcement prosecutors have it, he doesn't have any privacy rights. They're going to get it. They're going to be able to use it in court, whether he waives his rights or not. I think the other thing that Alan Dershowitz did that I think really stepped in it this week was that he wrote an op-ed in defense of Ghislaine Maxwell. if you're wondering if there's anyone out there who's going to defend her, well, it's Alan Dershowitz. So talk about leading with your chin. That's exactly what he did.
And I want to just follow up with you, Dave, because there's a big question here. You know, my understanding is that, you've said that the Epstein case occurred long before you took the helm at the state attorney's office. And I know that Governor DeSantis has appointed someone else to oversee this case. But was there ever an effort by you or your department to maybe locate Ghislaine Maxwell, see what was happening, an effort to try to prosecute her? Because her name has been in the news and these allegations have been around for quite some time. Again, we're talking about conduct in this complaint from 1984 to 1997. Was there ever an effort on your part to try to locate her through the means and resources of your department?
There's a few things that are going on in this area. First, the Southern District of New York, when they entered into that plea agreement with Jeffrey Epstein back in 2008, gave him and his associates immunity, which raised a lot of eyebrows because that's quite unusual. And it is something that for a lot of people really stunk. But the Southern District of New York came in and said that we are not bound by the immunity clause in that settlement agreement from 2008. You can rest assured that Ghislaine Maxwell will be using that as part of her defense, saying that she was given immunity under the plea deal and thus she can't be prosecuted. I think because it's being done in the SDNY, it's probably a moot point. I think that they'll be able to go ahead with it. Now, as far as what we're doing here, one thing we've done in this office was to put out on the internet everything that we've had related to Jeffrey Epstein, the documents, the audio tapes, anything, and it's on our website, State Attorney in Palm Beach County. You can see it for yourself. And then lastly, if I can add this, Jesse, our office, since we're a state prosecutor's office, we get cases from law enforcement. If law enforcement ever found new victims in our jurisdiction, obviously we would review it for potential prosecution.
Now, that's a good point, because that was brought up during the press conference, where if anybody believes that they are a victim of Ghislaine Maxwell or Jeffrey Epstein, please come forward, because this is a continuing investigation. I want to talk more about all of this. Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back right after this. Welcome back, everybody. We're still talking about the arrest of Jeffrey Epstein associate Ghislaine Maxwell. Big question is, what was she doing in New Hampshire? She's at this lavish estate that she purchased. Was she in hiding? Well, you know who we wanted to ask? Well, at this press conference, media asked the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. Again, the SDNY is going to be prosecuting this. They're going to be overseeing this. They asked Audrey Strauss, what was going on here? What, were you watching her? Was she in New Hampshire? Can you provide any details? Here's what she had to say.
We were working hard on this investigation this past year. It's not easy to put together a case that goes back that far, but it was not, and there's nothing other than we did the investigation and we were ready at this time to proceed.
How long was she in New Hampshire?
I couldn't hear your question.
How long has she been in New Hampshire?
I'm not going to comment on that. I'm not going to comment on that.
Where you ultimately arrested her? Was that her home? Was it someone else's home?
And that too, I will not comment on. That's where we found her this morning.
In making the decision to charge, you reached back to an era in the mid-90s. Is there any physical evidence, or is it merely the word of the women, the unnamed victims that are
Again, I won't comment on, beyond the scope of the indictment. You can read the indictment and see the kind of allegations we made, and therefore the evidence that we will bring forward to prove those you can kind of figure out. But I'm not going to comment on the specific evidence in the case. That will be seen in the event that she goes to trial.
Imran, the question is why? Why is she not being forthcoming about this? It sounds like they were waiting for her at a certain point. I need you to fill in the gaps here. And also, do you think the timing has anything to do with the fact that it was, what, only a week before, a week and a half, that the court approved the victim compensation fund for Jeffrey Epstein? Do we tie any of these things together? I mean, why was she arrested now?
Well, Jesse, I think especially when you're dealing with the federal prosecutors and the SDNY, everything is calculated, everything is considered. I think the timing in terms of the case against Ghislaine Maxwell, with the feds, they take it slow. They always take it slow. They make sure that every question is answered. They make sure that they have every piece of paperwork, every document that's going to help them support their case and prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. So I think the timing is calculated in the sense that the federal investigation with both the FBI and also the SDNY, the U.S. Attorney's Office and the SDNY, came to a head. They had what they need. They went in to present to the grand jury. Again, I think the COVID pandemic had also a factor involved into it, but also with the civil cases, the criminal cases don't necessarily wait for the civil cases. So the SDNY, U.S. Attorney's Office, they're going to do what they're going to do to bring their case, to prove their case. With the civil cases on the side, I think it's definitely a consideration because the victims or alleged victims and the allegations made here are a big factor, and the interplay between the criminal case and the civil case is something going to be considered on both sides.
Now, I actually Imran, I wanted to ask you one question before. I didn't have enough time. We played you, we showed everybody what Alan Dershowitz had to say about this. Says, show the tapes, I have nothing to hide. I hope there's tapes showing, I didn't engage in any wrongdoing. I want to give you an opportunity to respond to that.
Sure. So, Jesse, as you know, I'm one of Alan Dershowitz's lead attorneys in the cases of both David Boies versus Alan Dershowitz in state court, and also Virginia Giuffre versus Alan Dershowitz in the SDNY. My client has continually said in public, everyone knows that he's not shy about going out in public and letting it be known of how he feels, but he said since day one he wants transparency. He wants everything out there. He has nothing to hide. These allegations have been made against him. We are hoping that there's evidence that are going to now come to light, come to public eye, that's going to really establish my client's defense that he has nothing to hide, he did nothing wrong. And so that's why you see Alan Dershowitz out there saying if there's videos, show them, because there are no videos. If there are documents that implicate me in any of the allegations against me, show them, because there are no documents. So I wanted to comment, Jesse, just to give some explanation on behalf of my client, that the reason why he wants things out there is because he has nothing to hide and he stands by his defense.
Okay, and Dave, I want to give you an opportunity before we sign you off to respond to something as well regarding the Jeffrey Epstein case. You mentioned it before, putting as much information as possible that you can online regarding some materials in the Epstein case. But as you know, there's a big controversy here in terms of the media's access to the state grand jury materials, because in regards to the Epstein case, back in the day, the federal charges were dropped. He pled guilty to state charges, sentenced to 13 months in jail, ultimately spent majority of that time under supervised release. There's been an effort by media outlets to gain access to the transcripts of grand jury materials. A judge, Christy Marks, ruled that you are not ordered, you are not legally obligated to hand over these materials. And yet there was an allegation that there's a bias here, that there's a conflict in the sense that her daughter works in your office. So I just want to give you an opportunity to respond to what these media outlets are saying at this point regarding the handing over these materials.
Jesse, the reason why the judge said that our office is not to hand over the materials is because our office has never had the materials. It's as simple as that. You have about as much access to the grand jury transcripts in this case as I do. I have never seen them. Our office has never had them. And this whole lawsuit by a local newspaper to sue the clerk of court, who does have the grand jury transcripts, and our office is sort of a mistake, because by adding us to the lawsuit, they're adding a party that's never had the grand jury documents. So when the judge dismissed the case against us, that was justified, because you can't produce what you don't have. As far as I'm concerned, I hope that everyone gets to see everything in this case, and I hope everyone who is an accomplice, who is an enabler, gets held accountable. And that's why everything that our office has had in this case is on the web for everyone to see. So I'm glad you brought this up, Jesse, because I was a little perturbed by this lawsuit against us to produce something we have never had, we have never seen, and under the law, we have no control over it.
All right, Dave, I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate you responding to this and giving your perspective as the case progresses. We'd love to have you back. Dave Aronberg, everybody, thank you again. We're going to switch gears right now and focus on another big story that's coming out. You probably saw it. It's incredibly sad. It's out of Texas and it regards U.S. Army soldier Vanessa Guillen. She was a specialist who disappeared from Fort Hood back in April, and it is being reported that the remains of Guillen have been discovered. The two suspects here, the alleged killer, Specialist Aaron David Robinson, he killed himself when police tried to confront him. And then there's Cicely Aguilar, who was Robinson's girlfriend. She has been arrested and charged with conspiracy to tamper with evidence. She had a court appearance today, and she apparently says that Robinson killed Guillen with a hammer, bludgeoned her to death, and then recruited her to dispose of the body by chopping the body up and ultimately burying the different parts. It's absolutely heinous. Now, this is interesting because the family of Guillen has accused the investigators of delay, that there's improper tactics going on, especially with the chain of command. I want to go to the attorney who was representing Guillen's family. She gave an interview with a media outlet, just identifying some of the details of Guillen's death.
They couldn't identify with their dental examination. They couldn't confirm her whether it was her with the dental because her Vanessa's face was bashed in so badly there was no teeth for them to identify. So that's why they had to send her body to Dover Air Force Base to get examined.
Terri, I'd like to turn it over to you. How do you think the case against Ms. Aguilar is going to play out? Because it's our understanding that when she was read the charges today, and if she was asked if she understood them, Aguilar said, yeah, sure. Now, she appears to be a key witness here, turning on Robinson, who, again, is deceased, and saying he's the one who killed her. I helped. How is her case going to roll out? How is it going to play out? And what can we expect?
Well, we know, Jesse, that they were both clearly involved. Obviously, Robinson was the one who bludgeoned her to death, and it's a horrible, horrible case. But Aguilar now is the only defendant that we have. She absolutely assisted him. She helped him chop up the body. And all I've got to say is anyone who can do that really should be held responsible for everything that happened in that case. So, you know, I really hold her accountable, and I hope that they go after her with everything that they have.
Terri, I'll give you another quick question, 30 seconds. Do you think anything improper was done in this investigation? They say there's been delays, the chain of command was not held correctly, and on top of the fact that there are reports that this young woman said she was sexually harassed before her death. What do you think's going on here?
Well, you know, Jesse, we're dealing with the U.S. Army, and I think a little bit like the police, sometimes they keep things to themselves. But you have to think about the fact that, you know, this happened several months ago. We still now at least have it moving forward. And considering COVID-19, I do think that they have made some significant progress here.
All right. Well, it's a case that we're going to continue to follow. When we come back, we have to focus on Elijah McClain and Breonna Taylor. Some interesting updates in both cases. Stay tuned. And welcome back, everybody. It's on to Elijah McClain right now. This is the young man who suffered a heart attack and eventually died after police arrested him in Colorado. Now, McClain was apparently doing nothing wrong, yet police believed he was suspicious. They apprehended him. And you can hear on this tape McClain actually pleading for air, crying, vomiting. It's absolutely horrible. Now, what we have learned is that officers who were not involved in the arrest, they went to the site shortly after this happened and took these photos, selfies, smiling. We're going to be showing them. And you see it, they're seemingly mocking the chokehold. And then one of them texted one of the officers who was actually involved in McClain's arrest. And the officer responded with a text, ha ha. Now, in regards to this all coming out today in 2020, Vanessa Wilson, who's the interim chief of the Aurora Police Department, she has fired 3 officers, and one of the officers has resigned. Let's listen to what Wilson had to say.
While the allegations of this internal affairs case are not criminal, it is a crime against humanity and decency. To even think about doing such a thing is beyond comprehension, and it's reprehensible. It shows a lack of morals, values, and integrity, and a judgment that I can no longer trust to allow them to wear this badge. It's a privilege to wear this badge, and it's not a right. 8 days ago on Thursday afternoon, I was alerted that Aurora police officers had taken a photo at the memorial site of Elijah McClain. Not only that did they take the photo with smiles in their faces, they have reenacted a carotid control hold, which is what was administered on Elijah that night. This picture was taken on October 20th of 2019. I am disgusted to my core, and I immediately ordered an internal affairs investigation, and I promised that I would expedite that investigation, as is my right as the chief of police. It is important to understand, after I ordered the investigation, I made sure that each officer was ordered in that evening, and that those interviews were done that evening. I placed them all on administrative leave with pay immediately, and I want everyone across the country to know that by city charter, I can only place officers on administrative leave without pay if they're charged with a felony. So that is why they were placed with pay.
Okay, I'm back with Terri, Imran, and also joining us is Gabriela Teresa Gonzalez, criminal defense attorney. Gigi, I want to start with you. Great to have you back here. The police union issued a statement saying that all of these steps ordered by Interim Chief Wilson were violations of the officers' due process rights. This investigation is a rush to judgment. Now, clearly, the chief responded to this and said that the due process rights were not violated. All the steps were properly taken. What is your reaction to that?
Well, I think it's interesting. You know, as long as the officers were provided notice and the opportunity to be heard in this matter, their due process rights have not been violated. And as far as I understand, they have been provided notice, and a hearing will be forthcoming. So, you know, what I think is even more interesting is that the arrests that occurred in the case of Elijah McClain are arrests against the police officers who made light of the situation by taking photos, but not of the officers that actually choked out and caused the death of Elijah McClain. Well, one of the officers, yes, when he received the text messages and laughed at the text message making fun of Elijah McClain's death, but not the other officer who was actually responsible for it. So I think that the way this case is proceeding forward is very interesting, and I hope that it develops into more arrests.
It clearly is problematic in the sense that they apparently staged this to make the officer feel better about what happened with Elijah McClain. Just process that for a second. You talked about how is this going to maybe have an effect on the criminal case, because there is no criminal case. None of the officers have been criminally charged. Now, the state AG has been appointed to handle this investigation. The governor did that through an order. But here is, again, Chief Wilson talking about how this might have an effect. Take a look.
I also want to remind everyone that the only reason this came to light to me was because of an honorable Aurora police officer who was disgusted by what he saw, and he reported it to a sergeant. That sergeant immediately called me and said, "Ma'am, we have a problem, and I need to bring him in to be interviewed by Internal Affairs." So there are good officers, and I want to say to those out there that are working here today that I appreciate you. We will get through this, but hold your heads high, because we know that there are cops that have integrity, they understand duty, and they understand honor. These four don't get it. And if any officer in this police department disagrees and thinks that this was acceptable, I will gladly accept your resignation today. Again, I want to apologize to the McClain family, and I will open it up for questions.
Chief, what about Nathan Woodyard and Randy Rodima? They are other people that were involved in the original incident. Some may look at this and say, why are you firing people who took a photograph of the incident instead of the actual people who were involved?
So I was not the chief of police during the original incident. I can only deal with this incident, and I'm not saying that that is being investigated by 4 other agencies now: the FBI, the DOJ, the independent investigation that the city called for. as well as the governor asking Attorney General Bill Weiser to look into this case. So I respectfully am not going to comment any further on that. I don't want to interfere with any of those investigations. I'm looking forward to what comes out of those, and so we can move forward as a community.
You hear Chief Wilson creating a line between the good officers and the bad officers. But Imran, maybe more importantly here is what are next steps? Because as you heard from one of the reporters, they said, well, how are you going to fire these officers and no criminal charges are filed against the officers actually involved in the apprehension of McClain and the results leading ultimately to his death? Now, the question is, how do you think these photos and this whole incident is going to affect it, maybe even specifically Officer Jason Rosenblatt, who was involved in McClain's arrest and wrote the ha ha ha? How is this going to affect criminal charges, if any?
Well, you heard from the chief that there's investigation currently underway. It's definitely not the end-all be-all. Although she wasn't the chief at the time of the incident, she didn't have the power at that time to take action such as a firing. I think that we can be pretty confident that the federal investigators, the FBI, the special prosecutors who are looking at this incident, at the actions of these officers, are getting ready, quite possibly, to bring charges against those officers. Now you have this very poor taste, ugly situation, just the epitome of poor taste and lack of sensitivity with this photograph of Officer Rosenblatt's fellow officers sending him this horrible photograph, him responding, ha ha. It's not a good look. It's not a good look now, and it's not going to be a good look if and when charges are brought against him. He's going to have to contend with this again. Public perception from this photograph from his fellow officers, his response is just poor taste on the part of these officers who have been terminated and one resigned. And it's also going to have a bad effect, I think, if and when charges are brought against Officer Rosenblatt.
Well, when we talk about issues of intent, clearly if it was the officers involved in McClain's arrest and chokehold who were posing there, we might see a different situation. This obviously makes this whole department look bad. The fact that you have officers who are not even involved joking around about it. Clearly not a good day, but the chief is trying to, again, separate the line between the bad officers and the good officers. Speaking of that, let's switch gears to another case that has shed light on police departments, Breonna Taylor. This is the EMT who was shot and killed by police when they executed a no-knock warrant blasted through her apartment. And now the attorneys for Taylor's family have issued a startling new allegation. They are saying that the police unit who obtained the warrants, they did this under false pretenses. Namely, this was all in a way to clean up this area to make room for a real estate development. Gentrification. That's their allegation here. They claim that the police were targeting Jamarcus Glover, who they believed was dealing drugs and engaged in drug operations through these different properties that were in this neighborhood that was to be redeveloped. And clearly, they rushed to judgment. This is what the allegation is. They rushed to judgment, thought Taylor's apartment was being used for drug operations, even though it wasn't. There was nothing illegal found there. There was no illegal activity. And clearly, this police department acted recklessly. Terri, I'll give you the floor on this. This is quite the account that was filed in court papers. What an accusation to make. Is there teeth behind this? Can they prove this, and what do you make of it?
I think it's going to be very difficult to prove. You saw that the mayor said, no, that's not the case. It had nothing to do with the gentrification that's going on, and the city is trying very hard to invest in these impoverished communities.
Terri, I think we might have lost you right there. Gigi, I'll give you the opportunity here. So I'd like to turn to you. What do you make of this? Because this is an allegation of allegations.
I think Terri Austin was going into something really interesting. This is going to be a very difficult case to prove, right? If the lawyers for Breonna Taylor are going to prove that the state was motivated by gentrification and to clear out this neighborhood, and that they falsely executed this search warrant in order to clear out that neighborhood, they're going to need a lot more than the circumstantial evidence that's surrounding it, which is that there's this new development plan in the works, and also that you have this neighborhood that needs to be cleaned up. And also we've got an opportunity to execute a search warrant and let's eliminate these people. So it's definitely a strong accusation, and they're going to have to support it with a little bit more evidence than what they've got now.
Normally you'd say, wow, this seems so outlandish, but given the delays in the Taylor case and how the police department and the mayor's office have come under the spotlight, if this is true, what would happen next with the police department? What would happen next with the mayor's office? Gigi, question over to you.
You know, they're setting them, if that's all true, if what Breonna Taylor's attorneys are alleging can be proven by evidence, then there is going to be serious corruption charges breathing down the neck of the mayor and also the chief of police and anybody else who was in on this conspiracy to clean up this neighborhood and to advance the development of this project sooner by executing these false search warrants.
Imran, I just want to give you an opportunity because I wanted to, I have you here. We're talking about these high-profile cases, and I would be remiss if I didn't ask you this real quick. You obviously are one of the attorneys who represents Harvey Weinstein in his civil cases. And we talked about it last week, the idea of this settlement of almost $19 million to be paid out. And there have been attorneys for the accusers who have called this a complete sellout. I was hoping you'd give me about a 30-second response, 40 seconds before we hit our break. What is your response to that criticism of this settlement?
Sure. Well, Jesse, that criticism was somewhat directed at the Attorney General of New York. So I can't really comment on her behalf. But this was a settlement that was negotiated between lawyers for Harvey Weinstein, lawyers for the Weinstein Company, lawyers for Bob Weinstein, and lawyers for the accusers. It was negotiated. Right. Funds are coming from insurance company money. And the accusers who have opted in on this settlement have done so on their own free will. They're going to be compensated from this settlement fund. As to the accusers who have decided not to opt in, well, that's their prerogative. However, is it a sellout? That was directed at the Attorney General. No, I think it's a typical civil lawsuit settlement funded by insurance company dollar that happens all the time, whether it be a personal injury case or an allegation of sexual misconduct. And it's something that's being freely entered into by the accusers who have signed on and also the attorneys representing all the parties I discussed.
Well, look, I did want to ask you that before we hit our break, because when we come back, we're also going to focus on another high-profile case. They keep coming up. Lori Vallow Daybell. Of course, we have a new update for you. Everyone stay tuned. We'll be back in a minute. And finally tonight, Lori Vallow Daybell. As we've been covering, she, along with her husband, Chad Daybell, were hit with new charges of conspiracy to conceal, alter, or destroy evidence in regards to their alleged disposal of the bodies of Lori's children, JJ and Tylee. Remember, they were found buried on Chad's backyard. Again, highly disturbing case here, but what have we learned? Well, apparently, the felony charges, or two of the felony charges that Lori had been facing originally, desertion and non-support of children, they have been dropped. And we're going to break that down in a second. But let's just go back to when Lori was in court for a hearing facing these new charges. We learned some very, very disturbing details about what happened.
Count 2 is also a charge of conspiracy to commit destruction, alteration, or concealment of evidence, a felony, a violation of Idaho Code Section 182603 and 181701. It's punishable by that same amount, up to 5 years in the state penitentiary and up to a $10,000 fine. It alleges the defendants Chad Guy Daybell, Lori Vallow, and or another person or persons on or between the 9th day of September 2019 and the 9th day of June 2020 in the county of Fremont, state of Idaho, and or elsewhere did willfully and knowingly combine, conspire, confederate, and agree to commit destruction, alteration, or concealment of evidence in a felony proceeding, inquiry, and/or investigation authorized by law, with the intent to prevent it from being so produced, used, and/or discovered, to wit, the human remains of Tylee Ryan, which is in violation of Idaho Code Sections 182603 and 181701. Overt acts. In furtherance of the conspiracy to commit destruction, alteration, or concealment of evidence, and to affect the objects thereof, one or more of the following overt acts were committed by one or more of the subjects of the conspiracy within Fremont County and/or elsewhere. Number one, on or about September 9th, 2019, Chad Guy Daybell sent text messages to another for the purpose of disguising the destruction, alteration, and/or concealment of the human remains of Tylee Ryan on his property. Number two, on or about November 26, 2019, Lori Vallow provided false information to law enforcement regarding Tylee Ryan's attendance at BYU, Idaho, and/or her current housing situation. Number three, on or between the dates of January 30th, 2020 and June 9th, 2020, Lori Vallow refused and/or did fail to comply with a court order to produce her minor child, Tylee Ryan, to the Rexburg Police Department or the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare in Madison County case number CV 3320-45. Ms. Daybell, do you understand the charge in count 2 and the maximum penalty associated with that?
Yes.
Ms. Daybell, do you understand that those two penalties could run consecutively, one after the other, or they could run concurrent, meaning at the same time?
Yes.
Now, Gigi, I'd like to start with you on this. Isn't it standard to just drop these felony charges, desertion, non-support of children, when you're hit with these conspiracy charges, these conspiracy of evidence destruction charges? But I guess my question is, A, is that standard? And B, doesn't this signify that we may not see murder charges here? And I'll tell you why. If you're a prosecutor, don't you not want to keep going back, changing the complaint, hitting new charges, going back to court? When you're ready, you're ready. There was no rush to hit her with these conspiracy charges. Maybe they still wanted to investigate murder and wait another 2 weeks and then hit her with the murder charge, which is the highest charge. But the fact that they did this already, the likelihood they're going to go back another time and hit her with more charges, what's the rush here? Otherwise, I guess the question is it possible we may not see murder charges and these are going to be the highest charges that she faces?
So it's really interesting. I think what they're kind of doing is playing monkey bars from charge to charge, right? They are going to the next charge that they can really link Lori Vallow to in this case, right? So originally they dropped the desertion because now they've got stronger evidence of the conspiracy to destruct evidence and also the destruction of evidence. Maybe what's happening now is they are continuing the investigation, hoping more witnesses come through, hoping more evidence is developed so that they can get to the next bar of murder charges. Do I think that they're going to come up with murder charges immediately? You know, I don't think so, because they're still doing this lengthy investigation, and it's involved a whole bunch of investigations and trying to track down Lori to begin with. I think that they are holding these charges to her, though, so that she doesn't become a risk of flight, so that they don't have to chase her down wherever she may try to go if she's released.
Could very well be what happens. I'm still of the perspective that really what we're seeing is they don't have enough to tie Lori and Chad maybe to the killing of these children. Might be premature to say that. Maybe there's a lot we don't know. Historically, this police department, these investigators have kept everything pretty close to the chest. So as you know here on Law and Crime, what we will do is wait and see what happens next in this ongoing, twisted, horrible saga that is the Daybells. I want to thank my guests tonight, Terri, Gigi, Imran. Appreciate you all coming on to break down these really important cases. We're going to be back on Wednesday with other high-profile stories. Until then, be safe and have a great night.